Welcome to somebody asked me how long we've been doing this. This is the very first time. We haven't ever done this before. So welcome to the very first moments of the very first meeting. Visual Arts for Flourishing, Philadelphia. The very most important person in this entire conference just left the room. It was the IT guy. So we're enormously grateful to him for getting us up and running. We're grateful to you for your patience as we were getting everything up and running. We have been looking forward to this moment for a very long time, in part because it brings together people who normally we wouldn't be spending Friday together, and I'm excited about the variety of perspectives and areas of expertise and work that people are doing, and to come together and to share that over the course of today and then tomorrow as well. So I'm James Pawelski. I'm professor of practice and director of education in the Positive Psychology Center here at the University of Pennsylvania, where I also direct the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project. So what I'm going to invite us to do to get started is if you would introduce yourself to someone you don't know. So that might mean getting up and moving around, and that's totally fine. And would you please do the following three things? Let them know your name, where you're coming in from, what institution you're connected with, if you are connected with an organization. And then three, why did you say yes? Why did you say yes to coming today? All right, let's do it.
Well, my college mom are from
All right, let's come back together. All right. Great. How many of you just met somebody new? How many of you already having a good time at the conference? That's good. That's a good sign. Fantastic. Well, welcome. I also want to welcome the people who are joining us virtually from not just Philadelphia, like around the world. And so great to have you guys joining us. Welcome. We're also recording this because some people weren't able to make it in synchronously, and so they'd like to be a part of it. So I'm wondering if there are just a couple of you who would be willing to share what your, why you said yes, where you're from, your name, and why you said yes with the rest of us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Tang. As you can see, I'm quite young. I am a high school student, and I just came here because last year a family friend of mine talked about positive psychology, and I was interested in this because I had known a family member who had gone through depression, and then I realized, well, he recovered, and then like, what's after that? You know, how do you get from that 0 level to that positive state? So I did further research, read some of Martin Seligman's books, and I read Happy Together by You and Your Wife, actually. So I'm just here because of that. And then also, I'm a high school student, so I wanted to spread, I wanted to have like a lecture recital for my school. And then, so that's why I created like a nonprofit called Artistica Dynamica, and we're trying to do more lecture recitals around the Fairfield County. And we just wanted some like the correct insight on how to do that. So that's why I came to the conference to learn more.
Wow, welcome, Stephanie, man. Fantastic, great to have you here. We'll look forward to connecting much more throughout the day. Great, thank you. Anyone else?
I'll chime in. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I am, well, I worked in the art world for about 20 years at museums all over the world, MoMA, the Getty, consulting with Smithsonian and museums in Qatar and Saudi, and decided during COVID that I wanted to give back all that I had learned, because amazing culture and all that you have given to me. And during that time, I sort of found positive psychology as well, and Flourishing and James's work, and started thinking about how some of the practices I had developed in my relationship with art might turn into a pedagogy for exploring human flourishing in young. And so I'm getting my research. I'm doing my doctorate at Columbia now, exploring through an art education program how we can develop innovative pedagogies that build on positive psychology to support young people in their mental health crisis.
Terrific, welcome. Good to see you again. Anyone else? Why are you here? Why did you say yes? You're like my students, you're all talking at the same time. That makes it difficult. Just kidding. Al?
I'm here because my old teacher, pre-professorship, James Pawelski, flew halfway across the world for this.
So Al was a student in the very first philosophy course I ever taught as a graduate student. He was an engineering major at that point. And now, Al, just briefly, what are you doing now?
Concert pianist in Vienna.
Wow.
See what philosophy can do for, no,
Integral to that decision, because like long story short, I had no family support and was really trying to decide, like, should I continue the path in engineering, more of a safer path, or should I go to like, where I feel like I'm called? And then I remember consulting with James, who was still a grad student at the time, but also like very influential. So you helped make that decision.
Thank you, Al. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. Well, wherever you're coming in from, whether it's down the block or halfway around the world, wherever you're connected in with, whether it's a visual arts organization or a school or somewhere else, whatever your reason was for saying yes, we're delighted to have you here, and we're really looking forward to connecting over the course of the day. I thought maybe I would tell you a little bit about why I've said yes to this work. And so I spent my early childhood in rural Mexico, a little tiny town, 30 miles to the nearest paved road. I grew up in an adobe house. We had no running water, electricity when we first moved down there. And what I found was that living in a tiny little rancho in northern Mexico is fabulous. It is a great place to grow up. I mean, there are mountains all around. The sky is about as clear as it is today, only this isn't unusual. Gorgeous, gorgeous. And the best part of it, the people. Fantastic people. People who connect through culture. People who connect. I grew up bilingual, so I was able to learn the language and my best friends and learn about their, I had a friend, Narciso, who he used to bring his lunch. It was fabulous beans and tacos. And I'm like, do you want to trade? So he was delighted. I was delighted. We'd trade a little. So that kind of connecting, bridging gaps, learning about how other people, the traditions that other people have, is a large part of why I do what I do today, which is still trying to bridge gaps. And I think that the arts and culture are a great way of helping us to bridge gaps. Now, that doesn't mean there's not work to be done within arts and culture. Culture can be used exactly in opposite ways, right? And unfortunately, we've seen that in our history. And so we don't just want to say, oh, well, arts and culture, fabulous, everything is fine. But I think we all agree that there are possibilities with arts and culture, untapped possibilities, perhaps possibilities that we've lost sight of for how we can connect with ourselves, how we can connect with other people. Now, you may be wondering, are we allowed to talk about flourishing today? Pawelski, haven't you seen the news headlines? Like, there's not a whole lot of flourishing in the headlines, right? And I would agree with you. The world has some issues right now, right? And so there are racial issues. There are tensions in different parts of the world. There are tensions in different parts of the university. There are socioeconomic clashes. There are ideological, there's polarization, there are political issues and so forth. And so one temptation is to say, well, let's just focus on the problems because these are big problems. And I agree with you that they're big problems, but I think that there's no better time than now to work on flourishing because we know we can't take flourishing for granted. It's not just going to suddenly appear out of nowhere. And I think we really need a focus on well-being and flourishing and meaning and connection because they're important in their own right and because they can also help us in connecting with other people. And I think that arts and culture, the humanities, are domains within which those connections can be made in a powerful and deep and rich way. Now, my guess is that you are somewhat on board with that, otherwise you probably wouldn't have come to this conference. But I think it's really important to acknowledge and to emphasize the importance of the work that we're doing today. We're not just kind of taking a day out for a vacation to kind of forget about what's going on in the world, but rather we're inspired by what is going on in the world, both the problems, but then also the possibilities. And what can we do coming together to learn more about what other is doing, to be inspired, to redouble our efforts, to be able to continue to make a difference in the world. So why did the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project, this small research team here at Penn that I lead, why did we say yes to this work? Well, we have been very fortunate to be a national endowment for the Arts Research Lab since 2020. And about a year or two ago, the NEA said to us, if we gave you a little extra money, would you be able to disseminate the results of your research? Now, just a tip to all of you, if any funder ever comes to you and says, would you like a little extra money? The answer is yes. And we said, would it be okay if instead of like disseminating, we dialogued. And they said, yeah, that sounds really good. And so we actually have Sunil Iyengar, who's the research director at the National Endowment for the Arts with us. We'll be hearing from him a little bit later on in the day. So Sunil, thank you so much to your vision and the resources that you provided to make this even possible. We're super, super grateful. And then Sarah Sidoti she was our main grant writer for the National Endowment for the Arts work. And she said, you know, what if we had a meeting? We brought people together and we talked, and the rest of us on the team were like, that sounds like an interesting idea. Yeah. So and kind of disseminating in a kind of shallow kind of way. So we invited folks to come together in last October for a day of planning. We reached out to folks at arts organizations across Penn, but across Philadelphia, and said, is well-being something that you folks are interested in? Is it something that you're doing? And what we found was universally, yes, it's really important, and we'd love to learn more. And so we invited some of those folks to join us here at Penn for a day-long planning meeting. If any of I know some of you are here. If you were here, could you raise your hand if you were here at the October 13th meeting? So you see there are a number. Thank you so much for your time there and for helping us to plan this event as well. We're really looking forward to continuing this work by then broadening it out. And so we're delighted for each one of you who is here, and we look forward to how you will help us to move this work forward. So I thought I might share with you a little bit about the framing that we're coming at this work with, visual arts and human flourishing. And by way of kind of setting the stage a little bit, making some suggestions about some ways that might be useful to approach this work, and also by giving something that we can continue to reference and agree or disagree with, grow, develop over the course of the next 2 days. So framing the work, welcome and introduction to the arts, humanities, and human flourishing. So I suspect that we all agree by now that having clickers that work is really important and valued. Okay. Well, it was working. See, this is the thing. If the IT guy leaves, then the technology stops working.
It's a good question.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Interesting.
Oh, there we go. Oh, Sarah can just push it
Real tough.
firmly. All right.
Get in there,
All right. There we go. All right. All right. There we go. Okay. So I think we would all agree that arts and culture, the humanities, are important for human flourishing. If you don't, or if you're not yet totally convinced, imagine if we didn't have arts and culture. Imagine a world in which we had no music. Imagine a world in which we had no literature, no narratives, no poetry. Imagine a world in which we had no movies, no theater, and painfully, imagine a world in which we had no visual art. It would be a pretty bleak world. It would be hard to understand ourselves really as fully human, I think, in that respect. So let's bring those back. The arts and culture are carriers of vital meaning in our lives. They're load-bearing columns in the architecture of our souls. These areas and domains of our lives really, really matter. We turn to arts and culture when we're celebrating. We turn to arts and culture when we're grieving. So many of you will remember images such as these during the pandemic, when in Italy, for example, people couldn't connect as they normally did. They went on their balconies and they sang to each other. And this is not just Italy, all around the world. Also, all around the world, art museums and arts organizations began putting their artworks online so people could access them. Any of you here belong to an organization that did some of that? You went online more during the pandemic than you had in the past? Fantastic. Thank you for doing that. Really, really important. And one of the things that we found in our research, we did a study that was a representative US adult sample in the fall of 2020. And one of the questions that we asked was about how much people, bless you, how much people relied on the arts and humanities. To what extent have the arts and humanities helped you to cope with the coronavirus outbreak? And you can see that the answers are skewed way to the right. So many people reported using arts and humanities a lot. Furthermore, those who use the arts and humanities a lot, this was correlated with virtually every aspect of well-being that we measured. So positive feelings, life satisfaction, optimism, meaning and purpose, self-worth, self-efficacy, accomplishment, learning, skills, engagement, belonging, respect, community, trust, all of those things were correlated with people's reporting that they relied on the arts and humanities during Corona. Now, because arts and culture are such an important part of our lives, oftentimes things like literature and history are incorporated into the curriculum of our educational, schools and and colleges and universities. And so students all around the world love taking these courses. Oh, well, sometimes perhaps they do. How many of you honestly have been in a class connected with the arts and humanities in some way that was a little boring? I certainly have been there. Anybody else experience that? So what is going on with that? Well, I think it's important to realize that arts and culture can be used for a lot of different purposes. And when you're in high school, you find out that the reason you're reading that novel for your literature class is not necessarily to enjoy it and flourish. It's really for the book report coming at the end, right? Or it's for your reading comprehension or your vocabulary. Those are all very important things, but those are academic outcomes, right? And so arts and culture can be used for academic ends. They can also be used for economic ends, right? And so when we think about the industries that we have, the publishing industry, the music industry, the movie industry, those are ways of sometimes making a lot of money off of these things. And the arts and culture can be used for professional outcomes as well. I have nothing against those uses, the academic, economic, professional, other uses of the arts and culture. But I think it's important that we not lose sight of the eudaimonic value, the value for well-being, the value for human flourishing, the value for deepening our own connections with ourselves, with others, and connecting communities. And that's, I think, what we want to focus on together during our time in the next couple of days. So what are the eudaimonic benefits? What are the flourishing benefits of engaging with arts and culture? So I want to tell you a little bit about our perspective with regard to the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project in answer to this question. So how many of you are familiar with positive psychology? Okay, great. So you know that positive psychology can be defined as a scientific study of what makes individuals and communities thrive. So it brings together science and human flourishing. What we do is we add in there arts and culture. So we are at the intersection of science, human flourishing, arts and culture, and this results in what we like to call the positive humanities. So what do we mean by the positive humanities? We define it as a new field of academic scholarship, scientific research, and creative practice concerned with the relationship between culture and human flourishing. So when we talk about the humanities, we're absolutely talking about the arts as well as a part of that. So if you think about the terms culture and flourish or flourishing, those are botanical metaphors. So culture comes from the Latin word to cultivate. And so if a farmer is cultivating a field, the intention is for the plants to flourish. And so we think with regard to human culture, the goal of human culture ought to be for humans to flourish as well. And we talk about positive and positive psychology, positive humanities. For a moment, let's just think about what we mean when we're talking about the positive. Well, first of all, how many of you here have had a garden at some point in your life? And one of the important functions, it's not necessarily that much fun, but one of the important functions in a garden is to pull the weeds, right? That's an important thing to do. If all you do, though, is pull weeds, what happens?
No.
Congratulations, you got a pile of dirt, right? So what else do you have to do to have a successful garden? Plant seeds, right? So we have to plant the seeds. Now, what happens if all you do is plant seeds and you don't pull weeds? What happens?
You got a lot of stuff.
You get a lot of stuff which may not be what you were looking for, right? Because the weeds can kind of take over. So what we need to have a garden or a field looking like this is we need to do both, right? We need to plant seeds and we need to pull weeds. We need to focus on increasing well-being, and we also need to focus on decreasing ill-being. And in our culture, oftentimes it seems like we're asked to choose between one or the other. But I don't think that's a realistic, forced choice. I think we can focus on both and on the interaction between the two, right? Because if you've planted good seeds, then you're probably going to have a little bit less work to do pulling the weeds, although you still may have to do some of that. So I like to think of planting the seeds as directly positive and pulling the weeds as indirectly positive. It's still positive because it supports the success of the garden. So I just wanted to make clear that when we're talking about positive psychology, positive humanities, we're not turning a blind eye to the problems that are in the world. But what we're saying is we need to have a balanced approach as we're considering our efforts. So what is human flourishing? Well, I'll just answer this in about a minute and then we'll move on to other things because this is very deep now. This is a challenging question to answer. And I don't mean to be glib about providing the answer, but just some thoughts that I think will be useful for us. Human flourishing has been defined in one influential way, for example, as a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good. A state in which all aspects of a person's life are good. I've suggested maybe we should think of it as the fulfillment of human capacities through the advancement of both individual and common goods in harmony with the non-human environment. Important is to keep in mind that human flourishing, I believe, is constituted by a combination of high well-being and low ill-being. Now, this is admittedly an ideal. We're not always going to find that in the world, but it's something to aim toward. It's something to work together to try to realize. A little bit more on what human flourishing is and isn't. When we think of flourishing, the word flourish comes literally from the Latin word for flower. So we might think of April 26th, for example, where at least in this part of the world, there's a lot of flourishing, a lot of flowering going on. I live near a city park, and at this time of year, it is fantastic to be able to go and spend some time there. In the fall, there's not a whole lot of flowering. Does that mean that the plants aren't flourishing? No, because if the plants were flowering in the fall, that would be a problem, right? We want there to be a natural life cycle. So we want to focus on the moments of, wow, isn't this great? But also the lifetimes, the life course. And sometimes there's a need to prepare for the winter. And sometimes there's a need literally to flower. Flourishing applies to plants and ecosystems. So it is about individual plants, but it's also about the entire ecosystem in which those plants find themselves. So if there is a garden and only half of the garden gets the nutrients, water, sunlight it needs, and the other half does not, that garden is not flourishing. And of course, different plants, different people have different ways of flourishing. There are some commonalities of what brings us together when we say, we're flourishing, but we also flourish in our own unique ways. And we don't mean to abrogate that profusion of difference and possibility. Flourishing is not synonymous with privilege. Privilege does not guarantee flourishing. In fact, privilege often obstructs flourishing, both for the person with the privilege and the person who doesn't have the privilege. So it's a complex relationship there. Also, actually, let me ask you a question here. How many of you would say that at least in some area of your life right now, you would say you're flourishing, you're doing well? Let me see your hands. How many of you would say that in some other area of your life, you wouldn't call it flourishing, that you may not be, right? So wow, we can flourish and not flourish at the same time in different ways, right? So it's really important to understand that flourishing isn't just one thing, one box. It's part of a complex life. So flourishing and languishing are things that can be done at the same time. And of course, when we talk about human flourishing, we don't mean to ignore the non-human world, both because the non-human world is important in its own right, and because human beings just couldn't flourish if we didn't pay attention to the non-human world. So finally, if we think about flourishing as sustainable well-being, this is a paper that I've worked with some colleagues on, this notion of sustainability, right? So sustainable across the physical, the mental, the social, and spiritual well-being. And I would argue also the cultural well-being as well, across people, so across individuals, across groups, across ecosystems. As we mentioned, it's not just the humans, it's the environment as well, and across time. So we need to think about what's going on today, but we also need to think about what is to come. And this all needs to be done in balance and harmony. The temptation, especially in the West, is to say, whoa, let's just like flourish every day a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, and then we'll like get to the moon in our flourishing. This is great, right? And folks from Eastern cultures may especially want to remind us that that might not be the right metaphor for flourishing, that maybe flourishing is more about a balance and less about merely getting to some super duper extreme. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over these slides and just summarize what is in here. It's a fuller definition of the positive humanities, but it basically refers to collaboration. It refers to the importance of studying, focusing on the study, creation, and appreciation of arts and culture, and also on the assessment, so including science, as we've already said, and the advancement of it. So when we think of the positive humanities, it's a complex kind of perspective. Natalie Bondil has said, I am convinced that in the 21st century, culture will be to health what sports were in the 20th century. Cultural experiences will be seen to contribute to our well-being the same way sports do to our physical conditioning. I think that's a really great perspective. If you think about exercise science, we now have a science of exercise that helps us to know we need to do cardio, we need to do weight training, we need to do, and we can't just sit around all day long, we've got to be moving and so on and so forth. And that wasn't always the case. We didn't always know. And we're learning more every day about how to exercise in healthy ways. And so similarly, I think what we need is a science and practice of cultural well-being to know how much and what kinds of and how we ought to engage in cultural pursuits. And I think we're going to be hearing from a lot of folks in the next couple of days who will be talking about those aspects of that science. Just very briefly then, the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project here at Penn, we're now in our 10th year. We focus on theory, research, and practice. On the theory level, we're creating developing approaches, concepts, and definitions. I'm a philosopher, so you can tell probably I like definitions. And so we're creating a growing network of more than 150 leading scholars, researchers, and professionals, and publishing foundational books and articles. We're also doing basic scientific investigation, and you'll hear from Catherine Cotter and Krista Malobo later on in our conference, two of our colleagues who are doing specific work in this domain, and practice. We're really focused on the dissemination and application of this work. We don't just want to be focused on filling scientific journals. We also want to focus on how can this make a difference in our world. We've been able to bring together groups of scholars across 8 different disciplines in the arts and humanities: philosophy, history, religious studies and theology, literary studies, art, music, theater, and film. And we said to them, what can your discipline contribute to the cultivation and to the conceptualization and cultivation of human flourishing? So for example, we brought together historians, about a dozen historians from Penn, from Harvard, Dartmouth, lots of great places. And we said to them, what is the value of history for life? And they said to us, Well, that's a good question, isn't it? Yeah. Nobody's asked us that question before. And so we had a great time working together, focusing on that question with each of these domains. And then we asked each of these scholars to write a chapter connecting their own work with flourishing. So we have a book series with Oxford University Press. We have books already published on history, philosophy, literary studies, music, cinema and media, theater and human flourishing, in press, religious studies, theology and human flourishing, and visual arts and human flourishing. We also have already published some other books, The Eudaimonic Turn, Wellbeing and Literary Studies, a poetry anthology on human flourishing, and then it was Stephanie, right? Stephanie mentioned Happy Together, which my wife, Susie, is in the back there. We co-wrote applying positive psychology research to romantic relationships, and we included also elements of the positive humanities in that work as well. We also have a handbook of the positive humanities that we published in 2022 that's more focused on the science side of all this. So in conclusion, I just want to now, that's kind of broad, big picture stuff, and we're focusing in specifically on the visual arts and human flourishing. So there are a number of things and a number of ways that we need to come at this question. One is scientifically, as I mentioned already, and we will have members of our team, other folks from the University of Pennsylvania, other folks from beyond the University of Pennsylvania, researchers talking about how their scientific work brings to bear on this question of what is the connection between the visual arts and human flourishing. It's also really important for us to acknowledge the importance of ethical questions with regard to the arts. Whose art are we viewing? Where did the work of art come from? What does it mean? Who gets to tell the story about that work of art? There are a lot of questions that come up here. This is a beautiful painting by Christy Belcourt. She is an indigenous Native American painter. This is part of an exhibit that was the first major exhibit of Native American women painters, and done. The exhibit was in 2020. So those questions of ethics are very important. Also, of course, questions of application. And so one of the things that I do, one of the hats that I wear, is I direct and teach in the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program here at Penn. And every year we take a field trip to the Barnes Foundation. And I ask my students to look around at the art, and also to pick one particular work that resonates with them with their own well-being journey. So a few years ago, there was a woman named Julie, a student named Julie, who came to the Barnes, and she's told me afterwards that this is the work that she had been attracted to. And so it's a piece by Toulouse-Lautrec, and she began looking at the work, and she said, you know, I was attracted to this work, but I started looking at it, and I thought, this woman is sad. Why was I attracted to this work? I'm not sad. Wait, I am sad. Why am I sad? And Julie realized she was sad because of her work. And Julie was actually Dr. Julie Hayslip. She was an intensive care pediatric specialist at the University of Virginia Medical School. So you would think if anybody found meaning in their work, it would be Dr. Hayslip. But the problem was she didn't feel like she could bring her full self to the work. She really wanted to focus on how she could help caregivers be more resilient and avoid burnout. And she didn't really feel like she had an opportunity where she was working. So she continued to look at the work. 20 minutes can be a long time if you are not used to slow looking. And she thought, furthermore, this woman not only looks sad, but she also looks determined. And in the painting, behind the woman, it looks like there's a window or a door of some sort. And Julie thought this woman could change her circumstances if she wanted to. I can change my circumstances if I want to. How could I do that? So she asked herself these kinds of questions. She purchased a print of this as she exited the museum, hung it up on her kitchen. And 6 years later, I got to see Julie at a conference. And I said to her, Julie, you've got to tell me the rest of this story. Was it just a nice moment in the museum, or did it change your life in any kind of a way? And she said to me, James, it completely changed my life. I went home, I called up the nursing school at UVA, and I said, look, I know you don't normally hire doctors, but here's what I really want to do. Could I work with you? They created a special position for her. She took a $50,000 a year pay cut and found meaning in her work again, and has been working since trying to bring resilience to healthcare professionals. So that's just one example of how a moment in an art museum can help catalyze change and well-being. This was written up in the New York Times if you're interested in seeing the column, The Art of Slowing Down in a Museum. We've also been really grateful to be able to work with our great colleagues at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And then, as I mentioned, in October, we brought together as many people as we could, just beginning to come out of our academic silo and kind of see what else is out in the world. We're very grateful to the folks who were there at that planning meeting. And we're grateful for taking this next step of being able to include all of you in this work on visual arts and human flourishing. So huge thanks again to our team. If you'd like more information about the Humanities and Human Flourishing Project, it's in the program. Also, you can follow this QR code to our website, and we will have much more to talk about over the course of the next couple of days.